Today we're going to do blackberry scones. Now this is something a little festive, but you could use it for every day as well. And we're going to use things out of the freezer. If you have the fruit fresh, that works great, but this time of year often it is frozen. So I'm going to prepare a sheet pan in order for us to put them on to bake. I've got the oven preheating at 400 degrees. And I'm using parchment paper to keep them from sticking, but I always find that parchment paper wants to move off the sheet. So a little bit of butter underneath the parchment will hold it in place, and that allows us to work with it a little bit easier. I've got 2 cups of flour in a large bowl because I'm going to do some tossing and sifting with it, and I want to make sure that it stays corralled. To that, I'm going to add a half a teaspoon of salt, a 1/4 of a cup of sugar, and a tablespoon of baking powder. And as I said, I'll make sure we get it all in there. I'm going to whisk that together to make sure these are all blended. Back in the day, when I was being raised, Mom always insisted that these had to be sifted, and we have since found that whisking actually will combine the ingredients well enough. You do need to make sure that you aerate the flour as you're measuring it, since we use measures in the U.S. as opposed to doing it by weight. If you were to do it by weight, you wouldn't even have to aerate it before you measured it, because whether you add the air to it or not, it's going to give you the same amount. Okay, so we have those ready. Now we're going to add some cold butter to this, and I've got 6 tablespoons. And you do need to try to make sure that it's still fairly cold when you do this, because you don't want it to coat too much of the flour. You have options, oops, excuse me there, on how you cut this in. You can tell it's really cold because it's still really hard. You can either do it with a pastry blender, as I'm doing now, or you can do it with a couple of knives. But you're going to continue to do this until you get it into something that looks pretty much like fine crumbs. All right, we've got this into fairly good crumb stage. It's a little bit larger pieces than it is if you make biscuits. Scones and biscuits are very similar, but scones have more sugar in them, and biscuits usually don't have much at all. So next step is we're going to use some yogurt. And I've got, again, 6 tablespoons of, and this is just plain yogurt. You could use Greek if you have trouble finding plain, because regular plain has become a little bit more hard to find. And then 2 large eggs. And this is going to be the liquid component of this, so we're going to whisk these together until we get them fairly well blended, and then we'll just add those to the other and stir them together. Now, because we have some added sugar in here, it's not quite as critical as it is with biscuits that you treat it with as much care, because the sugar is going to help keep it more tender, whereas you overwork biscuits much at all and you end up with something that's pretty tough. So I just want to make sure that everything is well mixed. It looks like we're pretty much there. So these are, again, are going to go in here, and we're going to try to more or less fold them together, but there's going to be a bit of kneading at the end, so if you're going to need to actually stir it a little bit, that's going to be okay. All right. We want to make sure that everything is moistened. The egg is going to give it a little bit more structure as well. Generally in biscuits we don't have those either. So this is somewhat of a cross between a biscuit and other baked products, but it is traditional in some countries. In England you often hear mention of scones with their tea, although they often will call them scones instead of our usual American pronunciation. Okay, I think that's done enough. I'm going to fold in or combine in the next ingredient with this. I've got a cup of formerly frozen diced peaches. These were not diced when I started working with them. They were frozen in slices, so you don't need to freeze them in any special way. But when you're ready to cut them up, it's better if you try to do that while they are still frozen. You'll have a little bit better luck. And then I've got a half a cup of frozen blackberries. Now you'll notice that these are not in perfect pieces any longer, and that is my intent. I actually broke them up, because if it's in one big piece, then you're not going to get them dispersed through the scone mixture very well, and there you're going to have a few that have great big pieces and the rest that aren't going to have much. So this works really well if you've got frozen blackberries that have actually kind of fallen apart. Otherwise, you can break them apart while they're still frozen before you put them in, or we've got a few here that are still in fairly big pieces, and I'll just break them up a little bit while you're stirring it together. Got a little bit of dry mixture at the bottom, otherwise it looks like it's fairly well mixed. Just like with biscuits, we are going to knead them slightly. So I've got a little bit of extra flour here. We'll put a little bit on a board. And then get our mixture onto here and knead them just a little bit. Now, the oven, as I mentioned, is preheated to 400 degrees so that you have the oven waiting for you rather than waiting for the oven. We're using a kind of baking powder that isn't going to react until it's heated, but still we don't want to have it sitting around at room temperature any longer than we need it to. So again, we're just going to try and form it into basically a circle. That's kind of our goal here, keeping my hands with enough flour. We're trying not to use any more flour than we need, but we want it to be formed well enough that it's going to hold together. The more flour you add to it, the more probability it's going to be that it's going to get tougher on you. All right, I think that's pretty well in a circle. Now, depending on how big you want them, and I'm going to take a moment and wash my hands here, but we're going to cut it into 6 wedges. And so the size you get is going to depend a little bit on, and how long it's going to take is going to depend a little bit on how big the circle that you have is. All right. Also want to coat our knife so that it will go through a little bit more easily, and you're simply going to cut it into wedges like you would a pie. Again, getting the fingers with a little bit of flour and then transferring these over to our sheet that we already have ready to go. These are going to go in the oven. It's going to depend on the size and on your oven a little bit, anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. They'll be done when they're nice and golden brown. I've got one more step that I want to take here, and that's I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of coarse sugar on the top. And it's more decorative, so that if you don't have any, that's fine. Regular sugar doesn't work as well. It tends to brown a little bit too fast. So something that's a decorator's sugar is going to work a little bit better. If it goes in between, it's okay. We're losing sugar, but we're not going to have anything getting burnt on the sheet while we've got it there. The reason partly for using the sheet is to help protect from that. All right, again, in the oven, 15 to 20 minutes. And when you're done, you're going to end up with something that looks like this. And I hope that as you approach the holiday season and the new year, you'll give these a try. It's Blackberry Scones for Oklahoma Gardening. I'm Barbara Brown.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.